Trump's regime on homelessness. Welcome to Law and Society. Please subscribe. Let's talk about Donald Trump's solution to homelessness. So, if you'll remember, back in July, Donald Trump issued an executive order to tackle homelessness and crime and mental illness. And he tied homelessness with root causes being drug addiction and mental illness. Well, now we are seeing what Donald Trump's plan will be for homelessness. And what it effectively is that Donald Trump is reallocating funds from permanent homeless programs for people who are in vulnerable populations like the elderly and the sick, who have brought themselves out of homelessness, but they will be thrown out of these programs that subsidize apartments because the permanent housing programs are being changed by the Trump administration to funding transitional homeless programs that require you to get mental health treatment and drug addiction treatment in order for you to qualify for those homeless programs. And that risks putting over 170,000 people out onto the streets who had battled homelessness, overcome it, and are getting some federal support to be able to live their lives. And that permanent support is going to be taken away from them in order for transitional support for people who have to seek mental health care or drug addiction, which, by the way, fall into the categories of health care, whereas this administration, this regime is going out and cutting funding from healthcare. And while they're cutting funding from healthcare, cutting funding for suicide hotlines, they're also requiring that the money that you get for housing for homeless people have to be tied to your mental health recovery or your drug addiction, because those are the root causes, and we're not going to deal with the fundamentally obvious root cause, which is homelessness, which is people being left onto the streets for various reasons other than just mental illness and drug addiction. So I provided references in the description box. I'm going to read you some of the excerpts from each of these reports from NPR and PBS and Politico, and that talks about what this change is. The Trump administration has announced a sweeping overhaul of how it will reallocate funds for housing and the homeless, triggering concerns that it could lead to more people living on the streets. The change involves $3.9 billion in funds previously used to place people in permanent housing. This is the main source of homelessness funding. It is used by local programs across thousands of them across the country. And the reason is the Trump administration has a very different philosophy for how best to tackle homelessness and really what is the root cause, as they put it, of homelessness. They're very clear in their ideas that mental illness and addiction are the root causes, and therefore that's what they're going to focus on. Stephen Aide, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, a conservative think tank, says he calls it a top-down approach and says for years it was hard to get funding unless a program followed a policy. Aide says that left out a large group of people who may not need permanent housing or may want the enforced sobriety it does not offer. I think that we're going to be looking for is a reinvestment in transitional housing. That means places people can stay for 18 months or so to get sober or recover in other ways, and then ideally move out and succeed on their own. I believe that this approach fundamentally doesn't understand the issue of homelessness that can come from various reasons, not limited to mental illness and drug addiction. And that leaves out a whole chunk of people who will be disenfranchised from the homelessness programs that provide support for people who have made it barely out of homelessness and are getting on their feet through these permanent programs, but money will be taken away from those programs and put into transitional housing programs where the requirement is that you get treatment for mental health or drug addiction. That is Donald Trump's executive order. Mind you, this is happening because of an executive order. It is not the law. And the reallocation of funds is kind of a problem, but clearly with the MAGA Congress and with the rescissions precedent that they are setting, and with Russell Vought, you have an executive branch that is just switching money around, flipping it, and letting money go from here to there, paying for this, that Congress allocated for something completely different, but have problems doing that when it comes to SNAP at the time of a government shutdown. But in other instances, they're just shifting money around whether or not Congress gives them any authorization to do so, despite the fact that Congress has appropriated money for this specific reason. So it depends on whether the legislation that appropriates money for the homeless programs are for permanent housing programs. And if that were the case, this executive order goes against the laws that are for permanent housing programs for homeless people. And unless the law gives the president, the executive, broad authority of how to use homelessness funds that can only be assessed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, well, it comes out of a law. It's appropriated by Congress. So these people would have a cause of action, the ones who are going to be kicked out of these programs because of the changes, because the law says that they are entitled to that housing based on these programs. Now, we'll have to see if the programs are in sync with the law that appropriates the money. And that's a whole different issue that will come into effect when people are thrown out in the streets when these permanent housing programs are ended. So on that sad note, the homelessness thing is coming back to bite us. This is how Donald Trump wants to change America while not looking at the broader picture and looking and saying that I'm going to assign you with these two causes that are the causes for homelessness. I'm going to assign you the requirement of having only two sexes, the sexes you were assigned at birth, to be on your passport. These are all part of executive policy, and it should be looked at by the courts to see if there is discrimination on the basis of the Equal Protection Clause when it comes to the transgender issue with the passport photos. And here with homelessness, it is also a cause of equal protection under the law, because you are kicking some people out of the program while accepting others based on a set of rules that have come out of an executive order, and whether that is the process for people to be kicked out or given housing, that is a matter that the judiciary needs to take up. With that said, that's been 10 minutes of your time. Thank you so much. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.